Hello, welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Asia Society Hong Kong Center. I'm Holly Smith. I coordinate the business and policy programs here. We're delighted to welcome tonight Professor Craig Garthwaite. He has quite a long title, so I'm going to go through it. The Herman R. Smith Research Professor in Hospital and Health Services, Professor of Strategy, and Director of the Program on Healthcare at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. We are equally delighted to welcome back James Chau, President of the China-United States Exchange Foundation and World Health Organization Goodwill Ambassador. And they'll be discussing global trends in healthcare innovation tonight. And this is the second program related to public health that James has moderated for us, and he's doing a great job, and we're grateful to have him back. So thanks to you both, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Holly, and to everyone for being here. The second time, yes, I'm doing on public health. I'm not sure that I'll get invited back a third time, but let's see how today goes, because we have a fantastic guest in Professor Garthwaite. Should I call you that? Should I call you Craig?
Craig's good, yeah.
Craig's good, because when we spoke earlier, I said, well, you're from the university. He said, I'm from the business school. So he has a different style, and so I replied, oh, you mean you're a doer rather than just academic?
And he said,
yeah, it's not go that far, okay. So we've got a couple of academics here in the room, so we'll tread carefully, and then we'll hit them with drinks at the end of this. So what we've got are 30 minutes of conversation between the two of us, where we're going to be talking about bridging the opportunities of innovation in healthcare, and then we'll have some good time for questions and conversations around the room, and then we'll go on to a quick reception. So, Craig, thank you for being here. Have you been to Hong Kong before?
Yeah, I have. I started as one of my first students here. So I started coming here for KH, it was at 2016, 2015, I think.
Oh, so not that long ago.
Not in like geologic time, but in my academic time, it's a long time. So we run a joint program here with ASHK and I teach the sort of introductory strategy class for that.
We're here to talk about innovation, and we're in a city where it has experienced and witnessed and been part of great innovations over the past decades. But let's start off with this word. It's a three-syllable word. It's a pretty big word because people use it all the time. So it carries great consequences as well. But when you think of the word innovation and when you think of it in relation to health, what comes to mind?
So for me, I tend to think about something where there was a large amount of a time or a large investment made to produce some often product, though sometimes services, that generate sort of great welfare for a large number of people. And so most of my work, when I think about that, is in biopharmaceuticals. And so among the program on healthcare at Kellogg has lots of things we focus on services and products. I spend a lot of time thinking about innovation in global biopharma. And so there, I think particularly about our ability as a human society to offer treatments now that we've never been able to offer in the history of the world. And if you think of what we've done really since we sort of cracked the human genome, I sort of break the world up in that sense from 2000 forward. The set of treatments we've developed over that time, we've taken HIV from, I think the modern plague into a largely manageable chronic condition. We've cured hepatitis C. We've had massive increases in the treatments of cardiometabolic conditions. We've had, I think, improved, but not as much as we'd like, treatments in oncology. But if you look at what's happening in immuno-oncology and things like that, that's all like, that changes the very course of humanity, to be able to take what used to be diseases that would be death sentences and change it into either cures or managing conditions. And that's the innovation I focus on, because that can spread everywhere at that point. It starts often, we should note, in the US or in Western markets, which tend to get first access to this. Though I think one reason why I spend more time in China these days on healthcare is that's less true now. I think you're getting very early access within China to these products, and then spreads throughout the world after that.
Kellogg really is unique. I mean, there's so many fantastic American schools and institutions, but it's unique in the sense that it's managed to identify and push forward the frontiers on areas including marketing, also in management sciences, and also in decision sciences. With those kinds of skill sets and the forefront position that it carries, how does it impact its ability to reshape the course of humanity and also to secure a global future that is safer and, quite frankly, kinder than it is today?
Yeah, so I come from the economic side, so I don't know if I'm there for the kinder part. That's not really what economists do. But how we think about I think about it as the role of markets in promoting this type of innovation. And I think healthcare is an interesting sort of place around the world when you think about the different way that markets participate in healthcare. The United States is probably one of the more market-based healthcare systems in the world. But markets show up anywhere. You think about even the National Health Service in the UK, which we think of as primarily a state-owned enterprise, but still employs private individuals. And so at some point, market forces matter. I think the nice thing and what we can do within healthcare and what we try and think about for the program that I run there is healthcare is a place where, in general, the more you can do to make patients better off, the more money you're going to make. Right? And that means that we can channel those market forces and all of that ingenuity and talent towards things that make people better off. And when healthcare works well in the market sense, that's what we're getting. And so, if we think about the products that, on a pharmaceutical side, that have had massive improvements in human welfare, they've also generated lots of wealth for individuals. And following that has been an entire infrastructure of other people who would like to see those returns. Right? And so, we cure hepatitis C, and you have other people say, well, Gilead, the company that did that, earned $100 billion doing that, which is a lot of money, I want to note. But other people are like, well, I'd also like to earn that money. Can I funnel more capital into this and allocate capital more efficiently? And I think that's been a lot of the reason why we've seen this rise of innovation in biopharma particularly. It's that there's been this infrastructure to fund really early stage development and to unleash a set of entrepreneurial scientists to do that as well. Morton Shapiro is the longtime president of Northwestern. We were taking a tour around campus when we were building the hub, and we were talking a bit about sort of ingenuity and campus entrepreneurship. And he's like, listen, however much you guys think you teach entrepreneurship at Kellogg, the chemistry department at Northwestern is the most entrepreneurial department on this campus. Because every scientist there has like 2 companies and 3 molecules, because they all want to be Rick Silverman. And Rick Silverman, people who have been on the Northwestern campus, you see Silverman Hall, which is the head of all of our drug development. He was the scientist responsible for inventing Lyrica. And he and the university both profited well from that, and he gave a lot of money back. And so I think these market forces matter a lot for trying to get those products going forward.
When you're speaking about market forces, it also, raises a thought about, where do you balance the returns for innovators versus the global access that they have? How is there a balance there to be had?
There certainly is a balance to be had. I'm not sure if we always get that balance completely right or not. And I think it's a really hard thing to figure out if you think about it. So if you take a step back and we think about the underlying process for drug development, it is if you're an innovator, a company trying to do this, right, you're making a very large upfront investment with the hope of a payoff in the long run, right? And as a general sense, back of the envelope, you want to think about it, 10% of the drugs that enter human trials in the United States will actually get to patients, right? The other 90% will fail somewhere along the way, increasing costs as you go along. So it's a pretty risky enterprise. Once you've done that, though, you have created what economists would refer to as a public good, right? You've created knowledge about how to do something. So when we had ARV treatments for HIV, we learned about sort of the fact you can use these drug cocktails of antivirals to cure HIV. That's just like knowledge the world has. Absent some government protection on that, some intellectual property protection, anyone can really cheaply copy what you did. And you'd never make that investment unless you had this ability to get this payoff by having that intellectual property protection. And so everything in society, and every society around the world is trying to figure out how much protection do I need to give you so you'll make that investment and you'll be willing to create a new product that we can then give to other people. And every country has, well, because of international agreements, they've all kind of settled largely on 20 years. But how you pay for it sort of varies across countries. We're all trying to get that balance. In the US, we often talk about this as an innovation and access trade-off. How do we balance innovation for the future with access to drugs today? I tend to like to think about it's really just an access trade-off in different time periods, that it's access today to drugs that exist or access in the future for people who don't have treatments today. And I think that the under-discussed point in drug development is that it's sort of, in some ways, it's a luxury to be able to negotiate the price of a drug that exists. I often think about like Steve Jobs died of cancer. It's not because he didn't have the money to buy a treatment. It's because no treatment existed. My mother-in-law and my father-in-law over the past 5 years have both passed away from cancer. We would have spent any amount of money to be able to get them access if we didn't have the ability to do that. And so it's really just access across time periods. As we sit here, though, outside the US, it's also access across geographies as well. I think COVID made that a conversation we've always had, and probably the conversation started most clearly with the AIDS epidemic throughout Africa about access to these antiviral treatments, but really was a big part of the conversation during COVID about how do we balance access to the vaccines? Who should get access? Do we do it based on the ability to pay? Do we do it based on where the company was based? Do we do it based on where the greatest need was? Like, how do we think about doing that? I don't think in COVID we necessarily got that right. There's a lot of things we didn't get right during COVID across all societies. I did work with a bunch of companies, though, that were trying to figure it out at the time about how to distribute not just the vaccine, but also the monoclonal antibodies and other treatments that we had. I think at the time, though, it did, and I got, in trouble is not the right word, there was some negative reactions, some comments that I made, which often happens, but around whether or not we should invalidate the patents through TRIPS for the vaccine so we could increase access. And I was a pretty strong supporter of not doing that. And again, it came down to this trade-off, right? It's not, I think that if you believe that we would never have another pandemic, like this was the last pandemic in the history of the world, there's a strong sort of argument, let's take that vaccine, let's take it away from the companies that made it, let's give it to everyone and like make humanity better off. But I'm pretty sure everyone in the room realizes that this is not the last pandemic we'll have. Hopefully in our lifetimes it's the worst pandemic we'll see. And the course of history might suggest that that's true. But if we have another one, or God forbid we have like not a viral one, but something that's bacterial or something like that, we're going to need firms to, again, step up and make the investments that they did and be willing to put that capital to work. And I think we have to figure out how to balance, telling people that just because there's a global pandemic doesn't mean you won't be able to make a return on that investment, or we're not going to get the drugs that we need.
I was going to ask you about what some of the barriers are for entrepreneurs and innovators in bringing their products to market so they can be not only one of the 10%, but maybe so that percentage from 10% could get closer to the 100. But instead, I'm going to walk that back a little bit and ask you about the cost of innovation, because it's an expensive process with no guarantee that a product will come to market, let alone sell well to that market, even if it accesses it. So what are the opportunities that these entrepreneurs and innovators really see? And what is it that keeps them going throughout that whole process with no guarantee at the end of it?
Yeah, so in terms of taking the 10%, making it smaller and there's opportunities, part of why that number is what is that biology is just really complex and hard. And we've done a lot as like the course of history now to understand more about it. But what I meant when I said I'm at the business school is I'm not a real scientist like people who do chemistry and biology. And so, but if you look at like what we've learned about the body in biology and biochemistry over the last 30 years, where really in the late 70s, we're just kind of figuring out how the immune system works. Right? And now we're training that immune system to target cancer in patients in ways that even 10 years ago we thought might not be possible. There's a lot of debate about whether immuno-oncology would even work. Right? So some of it is just like the fundamental difficulty of that. Some of it is a regulatory question around how much do we want companies to have to prove that their products work before they come to market. In the United States and also in China, companies have to prove that their drugs are both safe and efficacious. They won't kill you and they'll work. That boundary around efficacy is a question about how much do we want people to have to invest to prove that beforehand versus allowing kind of the market to figure it out. And there are different sort of political and regulatory beliefs around that. But there's a lot of costs built up in that trial process. There's a hope that that AI is going to do something here, and I think we can't have any panel now on any topic without talking about AI in some way, but that AI would lower the cost of drug development. I'm actually less optimistic about that than other people. I think it's going to potentially get you through those earlier stages faster, and so I think where AI, at least today, really looks like it's going to be useful is around target selection and defining mechanisms of action and things like that, but the real cost is in running the trials. And so unless that early stage process somehow meaningfully cuts down on the failures in later stages, it's not going to lower the cost. And so you have to say, okay, well, if the costs aren't going to go way down, how do we keep entrepreneurs going? It's some combination of financial return and intrinsic motivation. right? And so I'm trying to be very specific about that. On the capital side, the financier side, the people giving the money, it's financial motivation. Let's be very clear. Like private equity is not giving money to someone not to make money. On the scientist side, it really is a mixture of both. Like if you talk to people who are, a lot of these early stage companies are, one or two scientists who have an idea and a belief in a product or a target, and they're bringing that to market. And obviously, they're not upset about the fact that if it works, they're going to get a lot of money, but they're also very tied to sort of the actual science underlying what they are doing. And so you have to balance it for them. I do think this ability and the infrastructure that we have built up on sort of the CRO or the contract research organization side has allowed like really small companies to get pretty far ahead and figure out whether their design works. And so that's allowed these entrepreneurs to get really big financial returns because they can really own a big stake of the company and take it pretty far through proof of concept. And so they get both the scientific curiosity that they want satisfied and the financial side.
We had a very brief conversation outside about it. Not only AI is a big part of the future of health, but also the United States and China together.
Yep.
It's not a trusted partnership right now. We all know that. But you seem to be convinced that this partnership, trusted or not at the moment, is going to unlock the fuller potential of what's ahead.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm convinced. I would say that I want it to do that. I think unrestrained, and this to be very clear, I get nervous when there are cameras, but this is primarily a US problem more than a China problem right now of what's happening with the discussion around for people who follow this in the industry, the Biosecure Act, and sort of the relationship between Chinese biotech companies in the United States. But I think if regulators and the government don't stop those partnerships, I think you have this potential to have really fruitful engagement between China and the US in biopharma. I think you have seen this so far on a variety of dimensions. So I mentioned these contract research organizations. Sort of outside Shanghai is WuXi AppTec, which is the center of this controversy. WuXi is probably the most sophisticated CRO in the world right now, like bar none. And I don't think, to be fair to the congressmen in the United States, they fully understand that as part of the problem. There's actually a long list of things they don't understand, so I don't know where this ranks on that. But like the degree to which these firms, WuXi in particular, are at the center of a lot of the products that we care about, right? And so the whole world is talking about GLP-1s, right? These anti-obesity products. WuXi makes most of the active ingredients for Eli Lilly for that. Vertex has not cured, but created this amazing treatment for cystic fibrosis. Really amazing through Trikafta and Kalydeco and these other products. WuXi makes most of that. If you spend time, as you probably shouldn't if you're a normal person, reading through 8Ks and notices from US pharma companies, what you'll see over the last 6 months is every single one putting in their risk section now the inability to access WuXi. And so like that's been a real benefit of this combination of very low cost, very high quality chemistry coming out of China, right? But I think actually what I'm more excited about that's sort of like making US innovation work better or global innovation work better. I think actually we're going to see over the next 10 years, 15 years, really innovative products coming out of China. I think we're already seeing that if you look at it, right? And so if you think about Innovent's partnership with Eli Lilly on their oncology products, those drugs are better than some of the oncology products we have in the United States. You think about BeiGene's product, Brukinsa. This is a BTK inhibitor. So Imbruvica is a really big product. If you like a nice book to read, it's called For Blood and Money by Nathan Vardy. It's the history of these drugs and these cures for leukemia. Amazing product in Imbruvica. Had these cardiac side effects though. So 1.5% of patients, really serious side effects. BeiGene identifies a cleaner, more selective BTK inhibitor coming out of China, brings it to market. Right? At the end of last year, we see AstraZeneca buying Gracell, right? The first Western company to entirely purchase a Chinese biotech. We see Alos, which is a Hengrui product that was spun out and then bought by GSK. These are all really, truly innovative products. And if you look at what's happened in China, it's been a very fast progression within the country from, I'm going to use some terms I don't mean to be pejorative here, but let's sort of, since we're all here in a generally academic setting, it started with vaguely appropriating people's IP. That's 15 years ago. And really, I think not a full respect of intellectual property standards. It quickly moved from that to what would, for lack of a better term, a me worse drug. So I'm not taking your IP, but I'm making another version of your product, but it's actually worse than your product, but it's still separately patentable. Then it got to what was Me Too, common US practice. This is effectively identical. I think of Me Too as like the statin market, right, for anti-cholesterol. We had like 9 different statins. You can think about the PD-1 market now for immuno-oncology. I think we have like 12 or 13 of those now. They all kind of work exactly the same. And now China, I think, is moving into what we might refer to as a me better market. I see your product. I see what's wrong with it. I'm going to take really amazing chemists. I'm going to fix what's wrong with it. And I'm going to make a better product. And that's where I think you're seeing this on the BTK inhibitors. I think you'll see this with antibody drug conjugates, these ADCs, people follow oncology, which is like perfectly set up for this type of setup. And you're going to see like really great development in chemistry coming out. I think where China is still lacking behind is on the commercialization of these products. And I think that's where the US companies have this ability to help. And what you're seeing, I think the Chinese companies have to get better about commercialization broadly, but also understand the value of what they have. And that's where I think their partnerships with US companies can help them do that. And I think if we allow them to work together, there's just, these are the 2 largest economies filled with great scientists that have the ability, and that's really what we need to get this kind of progress going forward.
Well, one thing that has kept them a little bit apart has been geopolitics, not only between the United States and China.
I haven't seen, have there been geopolitical concerns or?
Just a smidgen.
It hasn't made the academic journal, so I don't know.
And not just between these 2 leading economies, but through a network of countries that I think you referenced also when we talked about COVID-19, about how do you allocate and who is supposedly the ones most in need or the most deserving of those limited supply drugs at any one time. But what would your advice be, and I know that you're an economist, but what would your advice be given from where you sit professionally, but also personally, as a person of the world, on how countries can negotiate geopolitics so that they can have those fulfilled partnerships that you were speaking of just then?
So, I mean, part of it, I think, is a degree of understanding. And I think that's true across all of society, but also among the policymakers. And so Secretary of State Blinken was in Shanghai, I think, 2 weeks ago. And if you've got a chance, if you have, you can go find the video. He spoke at NYU Shanghai. And he talked a lot about the sort of way you can sort of move the geopolitical side forward is for people underneath the political layer just to have some more understanding. He was talking more about students and things there. And that's part of why I think Kellogg, why we want to bring sort of MBAs to China next year in this program that I'm partly here working on. So there's some level of that. That does require the governments to facilitate and or get out of the way. And so we have lots of problems now, I know, with visas, with the ability of Chinese students to come to the United States, the willingness of US students to come to China. I heard some statistic about, there were 100,000 students pre-COVID, US students in China, and now we're in like 4 digits, low 4 digits of students coming here. So we have to figure out how to facilitate that. It would be naive for me to say that there's nothing to the geopolitical side. Like there's not, I mean, obviously these are 2 great powers. I think it's a different great power relationship than we've seen in history. And this is me stepping out of my pure economist lane, but on the economic side, these are 2 great powers that are not like the United States and the Soviet Union, right? These are economically entwined countries. And there's a lot of debate, and every time I'm here, I think that people in the Chinese and the Hong Kong market say, well, we can't survive without the United States, and you go back to the United States, and they say, we can't survive without China, and this is a case where everyone's right. I think like the only way forward is for these countries to work together. I can understand why the concerns exist. I think specificity in the concerns would be useful then. Like, what exactly are you worried about? So if I stay now in my very specific health lane, it's been unclear to me exactly what the United States government is worried about with WuXi AppTec. I think they say things like, well, I'm worried that they're going to take patient data from the US and use it for some nefarious purpose. I don't want to, in a public forum, I don't want to necessarily get into a debate about whether they have a desire to do that. We could talk just on the science side, that WuXi takes no patient data from patients. That's just not their business. That's the other people in the bill, BGI and people like that. And so it's like this weird, like, fear that is not based on any specific thing There's a little concern about intellectual property. There are accusations that some companies here are stealing things from United States companies. To me, that seems like we don't need to ban relationships. Companies they're big boys and girls. They can take care of themselves. And so if Eli Lilly is worried that Wuxi AppTech is going to steal IP from them, they can choose what they want, what trade-off they want to make in terms of low cost, high quality versus some potential for losing access on technology. I mean, I think companies are doing that, and we don't need to protect them. So if we're specific about what we're worried about on this side, that would be useful, as opposed to broad generalizations of we don't want to have sort of interactions with them through TikTok or things like that.
I think somebody, a health diplomat, told me when he met our group of students from Columbia at the beginning of the year, never burn a bridge that you intend to cross over at some point in the future.
Yeah,
and I think that's exactly right, isn't it? To take that very long-term look. The count after the pandemic was 350 students, American students in China, and I think the latest count is that that's gone up to about 800. The vast majority in one campus, which is NYU Shanghai, a sprinkling over at Duke and also at Johns Hopkins Nanjing, and even in the Schwartzman program, which you expect there to be a lot. Of course, many of those scholars are not necessarily American citizens themselves. So really that number is still limping along, but in a way it's almost tripled from that very low base right after the pandemic.
But what was it right before the pandemic? It was like 100,000.
It was like thousands, what was that, 15,000, 20,000 or something like that?
Yeah.
It was like a huge number of
But that's the number I want to
China.
concentrate on more than the 300, right?
Yeah.
I optimistically want to say that like 300, 800 is this big increase, but 15,000, let's say that's the number, and 800, that's the concerning thing to me, of not having that type of collaboration. And it's concerning about not being, I mean, we have students that we accept at Kellogg that can't come because of visa problems. I was with the Dean of Fudan a couple months ago, and he was talking about the fact that you have any inkling that you've had some physics or science background in your education, you get put in like a different pile at the embassy, and that's just ridiculous. I think it's also ridiculous that we, as the United States, we have students from China come here where I was last night, but to the United States. We train them in universities, and then we make it hard for them to work in the United States, which is like, there's no human capital program in the country that makes sense for. As you might take from this, I'm a fairly pro-immigration in both directions, because I think we want the best product match fit between people and companies. And you get that by not thinking about, well, what border you are, but where can you work most effectively.
And when you don't have people coming over in either direction, you create a vacuum where people can fill that with fear and suspicion.
Yeah.
And also there's that distinct less opportunity for exchange of values and ideals and ideas. Craig, before we open this up to the floor, I just want to ask you one more question here. We talked outside about how outcomes have outpaced the rhythm of history and time. And if you think about Kellogg, I think it opened first not as a school of management, but as a school of commerce in the year 1908. That was a fundamental year of innovation in itself. I think it was the first time there was a flight with a passenger in 1908. It was also
I wasn't around then. I'll take your word for it.
Well, when I think back to that time when I was in school then, and there were a number of events in that particular year that chimes with the inauguration of this world-leading school that you're a big part of today. But when you look at the span of recent history, say in the last 5, 10 years, or if you look ahead to what really is coming up in the next 5, 10, 20 years, what is the innovation in health that excites and motivates and encourages you the most?
I think there's a lot of progress to be had on both oncology and cardiometabolic conditions. I mean, those are the places, if you look, like we have spent a bunch of time over the last 15 years. I sort of break things up into when we sort of fully crack the genome and not, on a lot of rare diseases, which I think is awesome. I think it's great, but by definition, the total welfare it can create is fairly small on a global sense. It's big for every individual patient. These are often deadly conditions, but by definition, they're rare diseases. There aren't that many. Whereas if you look at the cumulative burden that we still have, despite good treatments, of heart disease and cancer and diabetes around the world, and I think you're seeing a shift back in capital to be allocated towards those, and I think an understanding of ways we can try and tackle it, I think are really exciting.
Craig, let's open it up to everybody. Who's going to put forward the first question? I know some people here in this room, so I can pounce to the lady over here.
Yes, thank you very about metabolical and oncology. How about Alzheimer's? The fact that, we've got a couple drugs, they're a bit better, but they don't really improve. And I guess my second question is on AI. You talked about AI in drug discovery. How about AI in more personalized medicine so that you don't have to go to 7 different doctors to come up with, your solution, or you could see, if there's, 42 different factors which are causing your condition, you can zero in on those 3 you need to focus on.
Yeah, I can do this one by one. Let's talk about Alzheimer's first. I think that's a fair point. I guess I'm less optimistic about our pace of treatments in Alzheimer's, which probably isn't fair, because I think there's been a lot of controversy around the 2 drugs that came out, Aduhelm and then Leqembi. And actually, we had the CEO of Eisai, Naito-san, was at Kellogg a month ago. He's a Kellogg alum. And gave a really nice talk about the development of Leqembi, this drug, and about these beta amyloid blockers overall. And I say that I should be more optimistic than maybe I am, because we did have a breakthrough with the second of those products, this Leqembi, in that it was the first product we've seen that provides some proof for what's referred to as the beta amyloid hypothesis. And what that is sort of the fact that if you can reduce this amount of plaque in the brain, we can improve cognition. Until then, it was a hypothesis. I'd argue it's still probably a hypothesis, but now has some more proof on the positive side, whereas up until now we've only had sort of negative proof around it. And if we talk to people at Biogen, right, they will say that they are on the cusp of better drugs coming out for that, right? Now, I think this phrase that bankers use, talk your book. They want to believe that because they are developing the products. I hope that they're true. I think also on the diagnostic side, we have progress there as well, where right now, the way you determine whether or not you're a candidate for these drugs, you want to use it, is through and whether the drugs are working, is through a series of PET scans and MRIs and things like that. Really expensive treatments, really expensive devices. Good for GE and Philips and people like that who make these, maybe not good for society. But there are now going to be some blood tests that would help with that. And so now we can get treatments earlier. There's a lot of belief of treating Alzheimer's is about starting these treatments earlier in the progress of the disease. But we're not going to take every 35-year-old and give them a PET scan every year to figure out when they need to get access to this. So a blood test would help that. So we might see some progress there. I think as a need point, it's the place we probably have the biggest need right now. I think if you look across China, the demographics of what you're looking at there, where China is going to become one of the first countries, I think, in history to truly get old before it gets actually truly wealthy. I think figuring that disease burden out is going to be really important. On the AI side, I think AI on the personalized medicine and on the sort of provision of healthcare services is a really difficult thing to understand. I've written some about this. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And as an economist, I think it comes down to what do you view AI as going to do? Is it going to be a substitute for the physician? Or is it going to be a complement to the physician? So are we going to replace physicians? Or are we going to make physicians work better because they work with AI? The future of the technology is going to differ a bit on how you think that is. I think it's probably going to be more likely to be a complement than a substitute, because I think we are not at the place yet from a regulatory or a patient side where we're truly willing to delegate decision-making power around treatments to a nameless, faceless AI program. Whether it's good or bad, I think this is where we are. I think the FDA, which is where I think about this more on the regulatory side, AI is a really scary thing for the Food and Drug Administration, or for the Chinese FDA as well. Imagine, because the history of AI, if you think about it as a technology, has gone in there's 2 stages. Originally, we tried to get programs to do stuff. The thing is, we didn't know what to tell the computer what to do. It's called Polanyi's paradox, right? We have so much ingrained knowledge about how we do things, we couldn't figure out what we were doing enough to write the program to do it, right? And that's why we couldn't actually automate things as much as we wanted. AI machine learning conquers that, and that the machine learns, right? It actually, through these large language models, it can learn and move forward. But now it can't tell us what it's doing, right? We don't actually know the process it's going to make that decision. That makes a regulator really worried, right? It's not, I can't actually look explicitly at everything you're doing. I think of it as akin to drug manufacturing. If I told the FDA, right, I'm going to make this product, this is the complicated production process, but over time, the process is going to evolve to a better outcome. But I won't be able to tell you what I did to make it evolve or even what it's doing now, but you're just going to have to trust me that it's better. I think the FDA gets really worried about that. I think physicians rightly get worried about that and their liability concerns and things like that. The reason why this matters, though, on the complement substitute side is, what do we think AI is doing on some of these treatment recommendations? They're overcoming mistakes or biases the physician have. So you often talk about, do you want AI with the physician in the loop or out of the loop? Or the human in the loop or out of the loop is how we talk about healthcare. It's the physician. The problem of the in the loop, so like you're engaging with AI, is what is the physician doing then? Every time AI recommends something that they don't think it should do, it's unwinding what the AI is doing. But the whole point of the AI doing it is that they were seeing patterns that you weren't seeing and recommending these treatments. So there's some human nature interaction we have to overcome with that as well. I think we'll get there. I think people believe it like we're going to have, a doctor that is an AI bot in 5 years or something like that. That's not going to happen. I think anyone who is really confident in that can just go back and read IBM's predictions about what Watson was going to be able to do for us. Not only was Watson not able to do what it said it would do for us, Watson's no longer a company anymore, or that division of IBM. And so I think there's a degree of care that we have to take with these decisions. And I think in particular, that's going to be true for healthcare, where I work a lot in healthcare. I said one nice thing about healthcare is when companies do well, when you do good things for patients, it's good for the company. It's also a place, though, this is the most personal product or service that someone consumes. It's the most information about you. It's the scariest thing. It's the most uncertain place you are. It's often when you have the most asymmetric information between you and the thing you're buying. And so I think because of that, we have to be really careful about how we put new technologies into this marketplace, because it can override trust and other things I think are really important to how we work in these markets.
Okay, we have the microphone going first to here, and then we'll move to the third row as well. Yep. And maybe you want to introduce yourself, Lillian, a little bit before going into your question.
Yeah, my name is Lillian. I am Kellogg alumni, and I am Craig student. And I followed him from Shanghai to here. We were together joining Fudan University's event 1 month ago.
Was this the first student?
Not the first one, no. The first one was you were Kellogg.
KH,
Yeah,
last
KH
year.
Last year,
graduated last year.
Yeah, whereas he was KH 15. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am 23, 25.
Yep.
Yeah. So my question is, currently I am based in Cambodia. I have been there for the past 18 years for the ASEAN region. So we are running an incubation and acceleration center there, mainly to help the startups. So with the current situation, as you also mentioned in Fudan U, and also with the Wuxi government officers, so I would like to know, not only for Cambodia, right, among ASEAN region, Cambodia has already enjoyed economic development around 6.8 during the past 8 years, and also the government leaders has changed. Now the young generation is leading the country. Most of them, they graduated from the United States. So with the current situation, I would like to know, especially for the hair care part, is there anything like people like us in Asian country we could do to support the economic development in those countries? And also, as the situation between China and the United States is slightly tense, so is there anything we could do? Is there any opportunity you could see? Thank you.
It's a very lemonade out of lemons question there. If we're going to shift things out of the Chinese market, where is it going to go? I think in drug development, it's harder to move it in that way. And I think what you're going to see, frankly, is if U.S. companies are going to move things out of China, they're going to move it out of the Asia region probably. And I'll be careful I say this. I'm going to say something that's helped it all in context. I think that actually would be a good thing to move some things out of Asia. I actually don't think I move it back to the United States per se, but I think if there's something COVID taught us, it's that diversity of your supply chain is actually really important. And so it's less that I care about that it's in China or Cambodia or India. I would like things that don't have to cross just the Pacific, for example, right? If we have some problem in the Panama Canal or some problem with shipping, as we saw, getting things into California ports. So if I'd like to pick it up and move it to the US or move it over to Europe or something, just to give that kind of diversity of supply. So, and I think the US companies, what they're thinking about, if they're going to move production out of China, they're either going to move it to Europe or they're going to move it to the United States. And I think there's a big movement, which I do support with the United States, of inshoring some of the drug production for national security reasons. And that's just that, like, the same reason that we want steel produced in the United States, same way we want airplanes produced in the United States. There are, like, real national security concerns to have some of that capacity be domestic in the event of some incident. On the innovation side, though, there's this question of, like, where should innovation occur? I think that the smaller the country is, the harder it is to support robust innovation because it's really high fixed cost. And so I think one reason why you've seen China be this hub of innovation is an ability and a willingness to throw the kind of massive capital at it that the United States has long thrown, of just like government money coming in and supporting very early research. So I think you would see it more probably around digital health or services than you would around biopharma or devices, just given the capital allocation. And really biopharma and then devices in that order, where biopharma costs a lot more. I do think there's a role for these domestic innovation centers, though. And so if we take China as an example, you have AZ's got their facility there, GE has their facility there, which is they're creating solutions that US scientists wouldn't even think about because they're solving problems that we don't have in the United States or we don't care about in the United States. And I'm trying to be specific about how I say that. Like, a lot of rural US healthcare actually looks a lot like Chinese healthcare in terms of the problems of access and fixed costs. So actually, there are solutions. You can see Mindray actually making sales back into the, or not back into, but into the US now of things developed in China. But there is this sort of innovation question where if you are, as a scientist, you're closer to the problem, you're naturally more inclined to come up with solutions for that problem. And there's actually really innovative research now coming out about this, of even just sort of like why we want more female scientists, why we want more scientists of color, is that they're solving problems that are more intrinsically related to things in their respective community. And so these innovation centers are good for that because they're coming up with solutions. I think you're seeing really interesting things in med device in particular in China for that, out of the GE Center in particular.
Great. We're going to the third row over here, to the gentleman here, and then we'll cross over to there.
Hi, thanks. There has been amazing progress in the technology side of healthcare that you talked about with these cures for diseases. Kind of looking at the whole picture, there's also the delivery and organization side of healthcare. So are there some innovations in how healthcare is delivered? So for example, kind of the business model or organizational model of actually taking these technical innovations and having an effect on a population. So for example, you see telemedicine and what's this value-based healthcare and preventative things. So it seems like the model that I grew up with in the U.S. was, you work at a company, they provide a health plan that it's from an insurance company, they have a certain set of doctors, and then the insurance company negotiates with the doctors on the price. It's kind of a funny historical series of accidents that kind of built that model, and it's not notably efficient from an international comparison perspective, I think.
So I will note China is now trying to reinvent that model here with supplemental insurance being offered by your employer. So, taking the worst innovations from the U.S.
Yeah. So just in the general topic of the organization of healthcare delivery or business models of healthcare delivery, are there any interesting innovations in that sector?
So certainly, I think the way you sort of like stumbled on what we call it value-based care appropriately reflects the sophistication around that idea that we have, which is like this nebulous concept of value-based care, which is basically we would like to have a system where we pay you more when people get healthier. That's the ideal. What do we have in the United States in particular, and I think in China as well? We have a system that pays you more when you provide more healthcare services. Now, it turns out that those are both related and counterproductive at the same time. They're related in the sense that, to some degree, providing healthcare services will make you healthier. But as you get healthier, you consume fewer healthcare services. And what we're really getting at is that it's different kinds of healthcare services. We think of primary care and preventative healthcare, ideally stopping more intensive treatments later, right? There has been an attempt to create a lot of models around this. And if there's a place where capital is being allocated the most in the US on the services side, it's around value-based care. And you can't do anything in the US without talking about that. It turns out it's just proving to be very hard to prove out as an economic model. Whether that makes you an optimist or a pessimist about it, so it depends on your worldview, I guess. On the one hand, we're now 10 years into pretty meaningful investments in value-based care with a few successes and a lot of failures. And some people say, well, now it won't work. On the other hand, you're trying to reform 18% of the US economy. Let's put this in perspective. 18% of the US economy is the size of the German economy. So the US healthcare economy is the size of the German economy in total. So it takes a while to reform that. And you're trying to reform it from one that has spent 70 years figuring out ways to pull money out of the economy to one that is trying to effectively make itself smaller and not grow as much. And that just takes a while. It is, though, around, and I know I'm an economist, so it's obviously I'm going to say this, but it is around fixing the economics of the model, though. You need to make it such that people make more money when you consume fewer healthcare services, and ideally when you consume healthcare services that you don't need or that are avoidable, right? You don't want to just not pay for stuff because people actually want healthcare and they want to consume it, and that's around trying to make people healthier. And we've seen models in the U.S. around that. There are companies like Oak Street Healthcare, which is a startup in Chicago, was bought by CVS for $11 billion. It's a set of primary care clinics for low-income people on Medicare, where it's all about taking risk, right? And most of value-based care is getting the physician to accept risk. And the risk is that when the patient is healthier, you make more money, and the patient is sicker, you make less money. And so there has been a lot of innovation on that, but it's in kind of early innings, I think, to figure out how it's going to work. Part of the problem here is that in some ways, innovating in products is much easier than innovating in services. Because if you think about the traditional way we train doctors, right? It's see one, do one, teach one as the proverb for the way they learn. But really, what I take from that is that it takes almost a generation to change people's practice patterns. Because you're being taught by the physician that was taught by the physician before. And so you see a much slower pace of changing just the way that doctors practice medicine. And you can see that if you look generationally around how doctors do things. And so that slows some of it up as well.
Okay, we're going over here. And you want to introduce yourself? And
more former students.
Yes, so my name is Garrett Mosley. Thank you, Craig and James. It's a very interesting discussion. I'm KH26, so I had the pleasure of having Craig as a professor last year. So the questions around regulatory and compliance differences between countries or territories. Yep. So do you think those differences, and you could layer on fear of litigation as well, particularly for the US, do you think those differences have a substantial impact on companies in the way that in how they decide where to locate research and development, where they decide to invest capital in innovation? And does that end up having an impact on where those products get marketed first? And not just regulatory like FDA approval, but even how to access to patient samples, data management, and kind of all the way down the line of innovation.
Yes. Would you like more for that?
Well, yeah, and I guess do you think that's something that will continue? How do you anticipate that shifting?
Yeah, I mean, so it's certainly, I think I gave my sort of tongue-in-cheek answer because everything you said, it's going to affect all of those decisions to differing degrees. I think the clearest thing is it decides on product launch, right? Where you're willing to spend the investment to overcome different hurdles. And you can sort of one reason why we've thought about launching, and we're going to try and launch this healthcare program on Chinese healthcare, is to watch China's sort of rise up in launch priority for companies now. So if you go 10 years back, if you look at the DCF model for where I'm going to will this product work and how much money will I make? There would be a US column at the bottom or row at the bottom. There'd be probably a Germany and a Japan maybe an EU5, like the 5 biggest EU companies, and then there'd be this column at the bottom, ROW, rest of world, which is really just like some multiple, like it's like 2x, like something like that. But like it's basically like we don't care about that row. If we make money there, it's fine, but like that's not going to influence our decision. We're going to do it where we can be more precisely model the economics. And you've seen China kind of rise up. They broke out of ROW. They went above the EU5. And they're kind of there with Germany and Japan right now, right? And Leqembi being an example of that. Like if you look at where ISI has launched that, it's launched in the US, Japan, and arguably it's launched in Japan because that's where ISI is located, not because they would be otherwise. And it's been launched in China as well. And part of that was actually a pull. So we're talking about companies pushing and pulling products, a pull by the Chinese regulators to want Leqembi to come into the Chinese market. Even though the market's probably not well prepared for it in terms of the diagnostic capabilities, but that's a different conversation. So I think you see companies thinking differently about where they want to launch, and that's based on the local infrastructure. In some ways, your second part of your question on the R&D location is pretty interesting. About where do we want to locate initial R&D, but more importantly, where do we want to launch clinical trials? I think that's where there's potential progress here to be made. I don't think you're going to get to a point where the US or China is going to defer their regulatory authority to the other. What I mean by that, of like, if a drug's approved in the US, China will just adopt it, or vice versa. But there is this question, it really came up with the partnership with Lilly and Innovent, around where do trial participants have to come from in order to get through. And this was a pretty famous case 3 or 4 years ago now, or 2 or 3 years ago. Anyway, Innovent, Lilly tried to bring Innovent's PD-1, their immuno-oncology product, through FDA approval using only Chinese patient data. There have been some signs, and I would agree with Innovent on this, some signs from the FDA publicly that they would be okay with that with certain products. PD-1s being one in particular, where we think that there's pretty good comparable signs across populations. But it was shot down by the FDA on this fact that it had Chinese-only data. It was a lack of diversity in trial participants. I think there are lots of questions about why you want diverse trials. And I think we actually don't have very good diverse trials in the United States either. They're just differently undiverse, right? It's all 18 to 24-year-old white men as opposed to 18 to 24-year-old Chinese men. Neither of those are diverse. Maybe one's more applicable to the US or not. But I think if you're requiring companies to really build out global trial infrastructure, that brings the cost up of bringing the drug to market to do that. And that's why I think we could see some progress around the development part of R&D as opposed to the research part. I don't think it really matters where the research part is located from a product launch decision, because we're not making decisions on a regulatory side based on the underlying basic science. Really, it's on its development side of it. And so then the last thing you get down to is IP concerns, and then companies can figure out where they want to locate based on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bring a microphone over to this side over here. We've got Vivian Lin, who is the Executive Dean of Medicine.
Yeah, no, this is like a real doctor. I don't know if I like that.
She's
My wife's family's made it very clear to me I'm not a real doctor.
No, I think she's a health economist, right? She's at the University of Hong Kong, and she was prior to that at the regional Western Pacific office for the World Health Organization. Okay. So we're safe.
Oh, we're good. All right.
Then we'll find you any real doctors in here? We're going to come for you soon. And then we'll go to Danny.
Thank you very much. So I want to, in a sense, get beyond product and companies and think about if innovation is going to benefit humanity as a public good, then we want companies not just to do good for the patient, but to do good for everybody in the world somehow. So maybe we need some regulatory innovation is what we really need to do this, but I'm interested in, when we look at problems like AstraZeneca just in the last week admits that they've known about the complications arising from their COVID vaccine.
That doesn't work, or that it has negative health problems? Which complication?
The side effects.
Okay.
It's a class action suit.
Yeah.
Right? So it almost feels a little bit like the tobacco companies also knew. It's not as bad as.
I'd be real careful. I get real sensitive about this one though. Tobacco companies were only trying to kill people.
Let me go on. This is one example.
Yeah.
But I've seen data. Gilead gets all these governments to sign secrecy agreements that says you've got the best possible lowest price for Hep C treatment, and they're all over the place. And governments are being taken for a ride. But it's not just the companies, right? Governments promise COVAX to make things available, the COVID vaccines to be available, yet they hoard, they dispose, and huge proportion of the world didn't have the access.
Yep.
So it's not just companies, it's governments as well. And then we look at the overall incentives in health systems, where the pharmaceutical industry is essentially a chemical industry. Chemical industries are actually quite hazardous. We have doctors that prescribe drugs that may or may not be effective. This is why we have this thing called value-based healthcare in part. We have patients who may or may not take these drugs. They're disposed of in the environment. All this contributes actually to the kind of environmental health, the planetary health problems we have. So what does it actually take to change the paradigm of how we work, get everybody to work
So,
in the same direction for the benefit of humanity?
so it's a broad question, but you're
It's
trying.
a broad question.
You're trying that. I guess
It's
the
like
answer.
I'm looking for innovation
But how do we
here.
get humans to work together?
But what kind
and
of
share?
rules? What kind of rules?
I can't even get my kids' daycare to do that. No, but the reason I
Because
bring
we
it.
see these problems at every level,
Yeah.
and so the incentives are not right.
The question about whether this is like some of this, and also is a sense of humanity, right? Like, what COVAX existed, and we wanted to share the vaccine, but we also were worried that if we gave you some of the vaccine today, that we would want it later, right? And I think COVID became this place where there was just a lot of fear about how things were going to happen going forward, and so the worst sides of kind of humanity came out in some dimensions on that. Of like, where was there might have been greater need, and certainly after we had done the first round of vaccines in the United States, it is incontrovertible that there was greater need for someone who had no vaccine than the booster shot we got in the U.S. But you're going to ask a U.S. government to care more in a democracy, to care more about other people than voters. That's likely just not going to happen. And that's, if you're whatever government structure you have, you're going to care more domestically than you are globally, because that's the history of the world. And so some of it is not even a healthcare question. It's like a human nature question about how to get people to be willing to work together. The regulatory side's not going to solve that, because there isn't some world government that's going to say, we're going to allocate medications across people. And so it's like you have to have a domestic country willing to do that. I just don't know if they're going to be willing to. I'd like it to. I think I worry about outsized responses from that, right? And so Hep C is a good case for that. You might not like the sort of prices that Gilead gave. If you want to know, do you know who's most pissed about the prices in those countries that you're citing? The United States customers, who paid $100,000 for that trip.
As they should be.
But I'm saying
It's
we're
those
arguing whether.
secrecy agreements that are part of the problem.
But what I mean, it's a private company. They can have secrecy agreements. That's the way this
But
works.
that relates then back to the whole system we have of governance for these things.
Yeah, it is driven by private markets. Like that's how we get innovation. There's another state of the world where we could hope that governments can do this. Governments are proven largely bad at allocating
That's
capital.
why we're not getting the investment in antimicrobials that we need, because we let the private market drive things.
Right, but why hasn't the government stepped up to do that then? Where's the WHO funding for antibiotics?
Well, there's plenty of discussions on that.
Plenty of
But-
discussions. Yeah,
but-
that's
so
the
this
problem.
is-
We're
so
good at
this is the
discussing for
question.
government.
The WHO is not necessarily the solution. It's not the solution for many things. So do we not need a different way of looking at these public goods?
But the question is, who's willing to actually put the money up? Like, even look at Gates Foundation, which I think is a great organization. Their contribution to malaria treatments is a laughably small part of a small R&D budget for a biopharma company. And so it's sort of like why I said, like, I think markets drive this is the way you get the kind of capital you need here is you need either private markets to do it or governments to allocate it. Governments have lots of money, and they are traditionally very bad at allocating capital. Just look at like the U.S. budget and the NIH about where we spend money in oncology or on all the politically popular cancers, right? It's not about disease burden. And this is not, listen, I have lots of my family who has died of breast cancer. I'm not saying we don't want to treat it, but if you look at the disproportionate spending on breast cancer because of the Pink Ribbon Campaign and other things compared to pancreatic or leukemia or pick any other disease, government responds to sort of not necessarily where the pure public health is. And so the governments have like lots of capital, they're bad allocators because they're bad at it. Private markets have lots of capital. They're efficient allocators of capital, but they're efficient allocators of capital to what generates the largest return, not the best benefit for humanity, right? And that's a question about, I would like a world where we had someone with lots of money who was very good at giving it away. I just don't think that's the world we're in. So we're already in the world of the second best, and thinking about what exactly that looks like, I think is a fair question. I do think that I'm a little less concerned about these secrecy agreements because I think the rest of the world has been free riding off of U.S. profits for innovation. I think that money is made in the U.S. and it supports global pharma innovation. My only hope actually is that China pulls back a bit on some of VBP and some of the NRDL negotiations, so it steps up and supports innovation more than Europe. I think the UK has been sort of tragically avoiding its responsibility in funding innovation along with all the other European countries. And so my anger on the secrecy agreements goes in the other direction, actually, which is U.S. customers support innovation for the world. The innovation comes from everywhere. I want to know. It's not, globally, everyone's developing these drugs to sell at high prices in the United States.
We have a real cross-section of people who are here to see you this evening, including Danny Lee, who is an investor with many years of global private equity experience. So, Danny, I know you've got a question as well for Craig. It's setting you up here. I could have gone further into your biography, but I didn't. I thought I kept it simple. But you've got a question as well. Can we get a mic over to him, please?
Apparently you've been instructed you have a question.
Yeah, I've been told I have a question. But I actually do have a question, so pretty good mind reading. But just given what you just said, the Hong Kong government has been trying really hard to kind of start or foster an environment for biotech innovation in Hong Kong. Right?
Yep.
What would be your advice to them? What is needed? How would they do it? Because I've been hearing a lot of complaints from the industry practitioners saying that a lot of the money has gone to only professors who are doing research, but there is no linkage between commercialization versus what happens in the US.
Yeah, so I don't know a lot, to be honest, about what those professors can do with the technology. So I'll talk a little about what we've done in the US and see if it maps over. But we had a similar problem in the US in the 80s and 90s. A lot of research happening, a lot of government money going into into universities, but the professors weren't allowed to own the IP. And therefore, they had no market incentive that drove anything of what they had. So they were doing, for lack of a better term, pure basic science research. I don't mean to say it's a bad thing, but there was no thought about commercialization. I think when we passed Bayh-Dole in the United States, which was the act that allowed them to own the IP, even if it came from an NIH grant, now they started saying, well, I still want to do basic science, because that's where all drugs start. But I want to do basic science that has some attempt to lead to a product that's going to affect patients. And really what you saw was kind of a split in the scientific community between the more entrepreneurial and the less entrepreneurial professors, which was good, because we actually do need some science that's totally unrelated to commercialization to help us understand things. Then we need basic science that is aimed at patients. And we often talk about the idea, I'll say, the reason why we have high prices for drugs is that you can't take basic science as a pill. You do need that kind of commercialization. And so it is a question, and maybe we can talk after and figure this out, to what degree can those professors, right, giving them the money, and that pejorative term we give it to professors, can they actually create companies from it that can then commercialize? If you don't do that, then you're unlikely to get the attention on things that actually have the hope of going from the scientific bench to the patient's bedside, which is what we want. That's the path we want this basic science to take. I think you do need some market forces to move that forward, though. Which that would be part of it.
Well, professors can own IP in Hong Kong. And there are a couple that have done very well, right? So I think we're talking about ecosystem. I don't know if you have this view, because you work with UST. UST has been trying to push the same thing as well. It's just that what is lacking? If the Hong Kong government comes to you and says, hey, you seem to know this, what advice would you give me in terms of building up an ecosystem? What would you tell them?
The first thing I'd want to learn more about it. But I think I would want to understand what the role, like why do we need the government? So the companies are complaining that the government capital is going to the professors. What exactly role is the government playing that the private market can't in giving that capital? So in the United States, most government funding that's funded this ecosystem comes through the National Institutes of Health and the cancer societies and things like that. But take NIH, for example. What are they funding? They're funding the kind of early stage research that's actually very hard to patent. That's sort of their role. And because you can't patent it, there's an under provision of that IP. So if that's what the government's doing, then it should go to professors. If it's really about commercialization, it's not clear why the government's involved in commercialization at all. In the US, actually, they're not very involved in the development part of research and development. It's private firms. So the question is actually the infrastructure here to do that? Is it a big enough ecosystem? Are there enough sort of companies working on this? We do see often that biopharma ends up in what are referred to as agglomerated areas. In the US, right, if I look at the healthcare program for Kellogg, can anyone guess the 2 cities in the US Kellogg has the most healthcare alumni? What do you think? Boston and San Francisco. Not even Chicago, right? And it's all biotech driven because that's where all the companies are located. Why that happened, we actually don't know. Lots of people have tried to figure that out. There's some story that it's like spin-outs of Stanford and UCSF and Berkeley and some spin-outs of Harvard and but why? What started it? We have talent. I mean, we have University of Chicago and Northwestern in Chicago. There's talent there, but we never became a biotech hub. So like, what starts these equilibriums is hard to figure out. We tend to think that there's some that's where the government might start it, but you'd have a big enough base for it. It might be that Hong Kong is just kind of too small as an economy to do it, and that Shanghai makes more sense. Right? That could be what's also happening. That it kind of my sense is it started in Hong Kong and then quickly moved over to Shanghai because there was lots of access to probably excess capital as the Chinese economy overheated. Lots of money to throw at it. And you had a lot of scientists coming home from the US to China. My understanding is that, and this is like not even ethnographic research, talking to people, is that a lot of those scientists felt stymied in their US firms for cultural and or language reasons. So it's not that their science wasn't good, but moving up into true leadership positions, they felt they were kind of blocked in the US firms. So you have them come back to China. These are great scientists that now have access to capital in a market where it can do well. And Shanghai might just be a better place than Hong Kong.
Well, Craig, I know there are a couple more questions waiting for you, but perhaps those people who haven't had a chance to yet could move that to the drinks and do so when you can.
I definitely don't like to stand in the way of drinks. That's a firm rule.
There's drinks number 1, and you can corner him number 2. I think that's a fair trade-off, isn't it? But
so the hour-long talk wasn't enough for drinks. It's also
you have to ask Asia Society. But it's been such a pleasure, and it's a really nice way to say welcome back after some 7-8 years to Hong Kong. We hope that you'll come much more often.
No, I come every year.
You come I thought you said you haven't been. You've been every year.
No, it's the first time I came. No, I'm here every year.
Okay. You're not welcome back, but
you can still welcome me back. It's been a year. I keep fighting. I want to note for the February or March slot because they always make me come when it's hot.
They do.
So,
you should try June, July.
I've done. The first time I taught was in July. I was like hazing, I think.
I know a lot of people don't like the weather here, but I think we're very blessed that it's pretty consistently warm through the year, and we're really fortunate to have.
It's just like Evanston. It's warm throughout the year. It's great. Come visit.
Boiling, but I heard it's getting warmer. It has got warmer over the years, hasn't it?
I think the world has, yes. But
That's probably not a good thing.
Yes, it's probably not a great thing. We're about to have oceanfront property in Chicago.
So, Craig Garthwaite, thank you very much. And I hope that when you do return to Evanston, you do so with all our best wishes to your wife and your kids
Thank you.
back home. Thank you
very much. It was great. Thank you.